Bobby Lee Claremont and the Criminal Element by Jeannie Mobley. 1 hour from Memphis, Tennessee, 4:02 p.m. The smoking lounge was at the very rear of the train and had a sign on the door that read "Gentlemen Only." I knew I didn't meet that description. Then again, there were quite a few adult men who didn't either, and I doubted it kept them out, so I opened the door and stepped inside. A stinking blue haze hung in the air. Through it, I could see the rows of fine velvet upholstered chairs on either side of the aisle, many of them occupied by so-called gentlemen, puffing away at cigars and cigarettes. I looked around for a familiar face, but didn't see one. Instead, I saw a familiar back, almost too broad for the chair, which was turned so that he looked out the window. Malcolm. Exactly who I wanted to see. Then I remembered that he wanted to see me too, and this caused me to hesitate in the doorway a moment longer. He was bound to know what happened behind closed doors the night Jimmy O'Halloran died, but what did he want from me? Had Bugeaud or Kelly ordered him to rough me up? I didn't want to get flattened. Malcolm turned while I was still considering. "You've come this far, Bobby Lee," he called. "Sit down and hear me out. I won't lay a finger on you, I swear." I crossed to the chair beside him, my nerves thrumming with excitement and fear. Malcolm took one long puff of his cigar, blew the smoke out the corner of his mouth, and fixed me with a steady eye, sizing me up for a full minute before he spoke. I admit, I was surprised to see such a shrewd gaze from the hired muscle. "Mr. Bugeaud's planning to offer you that money again to favor his version of the story with Sergeant Hayworth. And it ain't my place to tell you whether or not to take it. I myself am on Mr. Bugeaud's payroll, and I'll tell Hayworth exactly what Mr. Bugeaud tells me to tell him. But you're just a kid. You need to know one thing before you take Bugeaud's offer. Jimmy O'Halloran's death was no accident." I tried to look cool and calm, even though my heart was hammering away a mile a minute. Getting the information I came for was going to be easy as pie. "How do you know?" I asked, trying not to sound too eager. "There was an ironwork railing on the balcony outside that window. It should have kept Jimmy from falling, but the bolts had been removed from the railing. Someone planned for Jimmy to go through that window that night." "Who would do such a thing?" I asked, mimicking Terrence's innocent, wide-eyed stare. "Do you think it was someone at the party?" Malcolm's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Who said anything about a party?" "It was in the papers," I said quickly, seeing I'd hit a tender spot. Malcolm took another puff of his cigar, eyeing me as he did so. "Let me give you a piece of advice, young man. In this company, it ain't wise to be asking a lot of careless questions." "Sorry, sir," I said, still going for the guileless innocence. "I just feel mighty sorry for Miss O'Halloran and that sweet little baby of hers, that's all." His eyes softened at the mention of Mrs. O'Halloran. "You're fond of Miss Nettie?" he asked. "Miss? Shouldn't that be Mrs.? I've known her for a long time. She will always be Miss Nettie to me." "A long time?" I said. I was trying to frame my next question, but it turned out I didn't need to. Not on this topic. He smiled, his big face turning as sweet and tender as a baby's. "I've known Miss Nettie since before Jimmy O'Halloran even brought his Irish luck to New Orleans. Since Mr. Bugeaud owned a crummy little back alley dive in Storyville, and Miss Nettie was just a stick of a girl singing on his stage." "When was that?" I asked. Malcolm took another long draw on his cigar and stretched out his legs. 1917, he said. "Sad times, what with the war. Miss Nettie, though, she was there every night singing her heart out. She had to sing." "For the money?" "For her soul, you know. That's why when Clovis Dupre heard her, he asked her to join his group. She had angels and devils all twisting around together in that voice, and a fella couldn't listen to her sing without getting all stirred up inside. With her singing, the Clovis Dupre Orchestra really took off. They were in demand, playing all over town." "And that's how she met Jimmy O'Halloran?" "Jimmy came to town looking for opportunity. He found Alphonse Bugeaud, and then he found Miss Nettie. When he saw her, he could think of nothing else. He had to have Nanette LeBlanc for himself and for his club. Did he love her, or did he just want her singing in his new place? This wasn't the information I'd come for, but I couldn't help asking. There was something about the story that filled me up and left me wanting more. Love isn't a strong enough word for his passion. He was on fire for her, and in no time she was mad about him too. They were seen all over town with her on his arm, living high. Of course, the real upper crust couldn't condone them, a Yankee Irishman and a girl of her background. But it's the 20s now, and folks don't care so much about who you are as who you make yourself into. Jimmy was nothing if not a self-made man, and he made Nanette Rover right along with him. Bugeaud, too. By the time the Cajun Queen opened, everybody who was anybody couldn't wait to be seen there. But if it was a high society supper club, how did they have the Clovis Dupre Orchestra playing for them? I asked. I thought colored folks could only play for colored folks. Malcolm nodded. That was a problem for them. See, in Chicago it ain't like that. But in New Orleans, Jimmy had to come up with a different way. He had been sneaking into the Negro clubs, scoping the talent, and he was convinced that a lot of the best bands were the colored bands, like the Clovis Dupre Orchestra. That's right. So Jimmy, he put up a curtain across the stage, all spangled with glitter, and he put the orchestra behind it and Miss Nettie in front. A single bright spotlight turning her as pure and white as an angel in the heavens, while all that dark, sultry jazz rose up around her out of nowhere. It was pure genius. And when she opened her mouth to sing, enchante, as Mr. Bugeaud would say. Did folks know the orchestra was colored? I asked. Sure they did. That was one of the big attractions. White folks getting to listen to one of the really good colored bands without risking going to a colored club, and with that black curtain meeting the requirements of Jim Crow. After all, the laws weren't meant to keep white folks from getting their fair share of good music. So the club was a success and Jimmy and Nanette got married? I asked. It was a success, all right, especially after Prohibition. The Cajun Queen had connections that kept the good times flowing, if you take my meaning. Connections? I said, sitting up a little straighter. I'd been lulled by the love story and memories of a good time. But I was alert again now. Is that where Mr. Kelly comes in? Malcolm gave me a warning glance. You're asking those careless questions again, he said. You'd be wise to mind your own business where Kelly's concerned. So Kelly was a criminal. Now I was getting somewhere. What about Alphonse Bugeaud? I asked, risking one more careless question while he was in the mood to talk. He had a place in New Orleans before Jimmy showed up. Surely he had connections too. Bugeaud's better at spending money than at making it, Malcolm said. So think carefully before you make any deals with anyone, young man. There's more to this than meets the eye. Jimmy's connections may have cost him his life, and just because he's dead don't mean those connections are severed. But that's what I wanted to ask you about. That's why I came here, to find out what was going on at the Cajun Queen that night. Malcolm shook his head, slow and full of warning. You don't need to know that, Bobby Lee. That question is more than careless. It's dangerous. Do the others know that he was murdered? I asked. Malcolm's mouth tightened. Why do you think Mr. Bugeaud is traveling with the bodyguard? Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got to get back on duty. He turned and walked away, leaving me to contemplate what had happened and what might happen still.